of April. I thought I'd play an April Fool's joke on you, but nevertheless. But anyhow, welcome. We're going to go, it looks like we have 5 of our committee members who are present. So we do have a quorum. I know that Kate is going to join us, but she may be a bit late. Michael will not be joining us, nor will Nancy, and but I haven't heard anything from Kenan. So, but I just want to welcome Tom Olivier. Thank you for joining us. Really glad that you're here today to be part of the discussion, and also Rod and Maggie Walker. Thanks, you guys are always such great followers of the NHC, and so we look forward to hearing from you as well. And then to welcome Scott Clark. Thank you for being here. And
I'm here too. This is Bruce.
Questions? Oh, who was that? Hi, Bruce.
That was Bruce.
Great. I'm glad you were able to call in. Fantastic.
Bruce, is that you, 6589?
That is me, 6589.
Okay. Carolyn, can
Fantastic.
you rename him so we can see who that is?
I cannot because he's calling in.
Oh, okay. You can just hit the 3 dots and rename him, I think.
I can. Yeah, I can. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. And this meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with the Albemarle County Continuity of Government Ordinance. And I just want to remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded, and also that this online meeting and any associated chats are for the public, will be available on public record. Even the private comments directed to specific members are likely to be subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. And so our first order of business would be to we're going to go ahead, should we list everybody that's here? I'm always, the people who are present, for the members who are present are Bruce Gatlin Austin, Emily Luke, Leah Young, Lonnie Murray, and Peggy Cornett. Did I get everybody? I think so. All right, and what we'll do is we'll go ahead and hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda for today's meeting. And if somebody would like to make a motion to approve the agenda.
I move, Peggy Cornett moves to approve the agenda.
Thank you. And a second?
I'll second, Emily.
And Emily, thank you for
before we do that, don't we, Christine, before we do that, don't we need to do the proclamation?
She just did.
Oh, did
Yeah,
she?
I did.
I thought we had actually to vote on it.
Oh, that's the other thing.
Do we vote on the proclamation? We can go ahead and vote on that. I'm going to go down. Emily?
Yes.
Leah?
I'm confused. Well, I thought the proclamation was the reading of the legalese at the beginning of the meeting.
Yes. Yeah,
Did
it's
we
the,
have,
it's
I
the
don't think we
emergency.
voted on that before, have we?
It's the emergency.
to vote
it's
on
the emerg-
No.
Well,
Christine's just been reading it, I believe.
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah, I've just been reading.
well, we always read it and vote on it at the beginning of conservation district meetings, but maybe county things are different, I guess. I don't know.
We haven't been voting on it. I've just read it.
In a couple of the other groups I work with.
It's okay, we just read it.
Scott, can you go ahead and say what you're going to say?
Sorry, I'm breaking up there. And a couple other groups I've worked with, there is no need to vote on it. The easement authority does have the members respond to the roll call, but you all basically did a roll call. So I don't think there's any need for any other action on that.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
It's,
That's correct, because the PC does not vote on it either.
Okay,
Okay, all right, so we're gonna just go ahead, we have a second on the agenda, so we're just gonna go and vote on the agenda then. So Emily,
Yes. I approve.
Leah,
Yes.
Bruce,
Yes.
Lonnie,
Where did Lonnie go?
Oh, sorry.
Lonnie,
My sound dropped out. Yes.
and then, and Peggy, of course.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Okay,
Double
all
yes.
right, we're gonna move on. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to the minutes of our last meeting in March. And hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at those meeting minutes. And if you have something that you want to add to that, you can speak up now or any
You mean
changes.
February, right? Our last meeting was February.
Well,
No, it's
no, it
March.
was March because we're April. Yeah, because this is our April
Oh,
meeting.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Sorry.
It's April Fools.
April Fools, foolishness here.
It's also
So
Easter week.
so if anybody has something they want to amend, if you'd like to amend those minutes, please speak up. If not, somebody can make a motion to approve them.
I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes. This is
And
Lonnie.
a second.
Second.
Okay.
Second, thank you, Bruce. And we're gonna do a full vote on that. Emily,
Yes, I approve.
thank you. Leah,
Yes.
okay. And Bruce,
Yes.
thank you. Lonnie
Yes.
and Peggy.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. All right, you guys, we're going to go ahead and begin our meeting. And I just want to introduce Scott Clark. Thank you again, Scott, for coming to speak with us yet again. Your wisdom is always appreciated. And I had gone back and listened to the Stream Health Initiative, the very first of the series where you talked about the history of the rural area in Albemarle County. And it was really great. And I just want to recommend, if you have not seen the first of that series, of the Stream Health series, the videos, they're fantastic, all of them, but that one in particular was really great. So thank you for that. And Scott, hopefully you've had a chance to look at some of the questions that we put forth to you. I think that the main objective for asking you to come in was really wanting to know, how can we help to conserve and protect biodiversity in the rural area? And so that's sort of the root of the questions that we're asking you, and looking for your expertise and guidance in helping us to understand opportunities that may be available where we can help to make that happen in a more concrete way.
Great. Well, thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. I'm always glad to come back to this group and hear what everybody's up to. What I thought I would do to start with is I just took the list of questions as it stood about Monday or Tuesday and reordered it a little bit to make it easier for me to follow, and added a couple of notes. So maybe if I can just run through that for a little while, and then if there's some big picture questions or something that we want to talk about in more detail, we can do that. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
That'd be great. Thank you.
If I I can find the right screen. Where did you go? Sorry about that. It's being difficult for a second here. All right, maybe that will help.
I'll just throw in a second plug while he's getting ready that the webinar about the rural area, there's a lot of information in there about historical land and water use and you know, how that looks on the landscape today. And it was just really fascinating, really well done. So, and actually all of our webinars are recorded on the public input site, so you can get to them. If you have any trouble, let me know.
Okay,
I
think
really
got it.
enjoyed the maps that you shared, Scott.
Well,
and
I'm
then
a
we-
history nerd and a map nerd, so it was all fun for me.
Yeah, they were really great.
So there's a bunch of questions here. By the content of some of these questions, I suspect you all know more than I do, and I'll try to help anyway. But and there'll probably be a few things I can't answer yet, but I will, if I can't, I'll tell you that, and we'll figure out a way to get the information. So I'm just going to run through them one at a time. If you need to stop me, feel free, and then at the end we can cover anything that I may have missed. So the first category is rural land planning and zoning questions. And the first question is, what guidance is in place for solar farms? I'm backing up in my explanation already. Typically, when Albemarle County adopts a new use into the zoning ordinance, we write what are called supplemental regulations. So the main section of the zoning ordinance that lists what's permitted in a given district will just say this is permitted, but sometimes it'll say, see section 5 point something. And 5 point something is where we keep the additional performance standards or requirements for certain uses. So for example, agricultural events and special events, wineries, farm worker housing, lots of things that we've adopted as new uses in the past. We have then laid out very concrete expectations for them, sometimes in overwhelming detail in the supplemental regulations. The solar utility facilities were adopted differently. We didn't do the supplemental regulations for that use as we had for many others, I think because it was evolving very quickly and because there was a lot of support on the board for getting these uses permitted quickly. So, however, I don't want that to sound like there is no guidance. There was a lot of guidance that was provided from the Planning Commission in topics they wanted to see in the applications and have covered in staff reports, which are many of the things you all would expect. Erosion and water impacts, can you have native plants? What's the impact on future use of the land as farming? Is the land being converted from forests to open land in order to do this, which we hope it's not. So there's a ton of ideas out there about how we ought to do these things right. But implicit in your question is, shouldn't we have more specific regulations? And I think we probably should, and I think we probably will at some point, because we seem to be getting more and more of these things. We've approved one, we've got 2 under review at the moment, and 1 or 2 more that we expect to come in soon. So they seem to be accelerating. And it could well happen in the near future that we'll end up adopting a set of supplemental regulations for solar utility facilities. And I would hope that if we did that, we would consult with this committee about especially the land cover considerations, and can you use the site for pollinator friendly plants while it's in operation as a solar generating station, things like that. So I hope that answers the question. Have we considered adopting the guidelines from the Louisa ordinance? I think that says it's behind, yeah.
Scott,
Not that one specifically, sure.
before you go on, there's a question from Lonnie.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, my understanding, there's industry leaders and experts in the state that actually work together on the pollinator friendly guidelines for solar facilities. So that's one that I think I would hope would be something we could strongly consider, because it was actually developed with the support of the solar industry in Virginia.
Yeah, and if we are able to get these supplemental regs written, it'll almost certainly be done by me and by Bill Fritz, and both of us are really pretty interested in these facilities and in the pollinator-friendly plantings aspect of them. So if we keep getting these, I think it's probably going to become a significant factor. But even if it's not in the zoning ordinance as a supplemental regulation, we always pursue that topic with the applicants. I will say it didn't go all that well with the first one we did over on Route 53. I think Bill is working on that now with the one he's doing in Batesville. And then the one I'm working on right now is actually proposed to be on top of a capped section of the Ivy landfill. So it's not really going to be possible to do native plantings there, I don't think, just because there's so many requirements for how they manage that cap. But that's an oddball, and there probably won't be any others like that. But one way or another, we are definitely hoping to get those kind of guidelines in place, whether we do it one by one as the individual applications come in, or if we're able to actually adopt it as a requirement. Okay. The rest of the questions in this section tend to be about subdivision and development, which, as we all know, is one of the major threats to protecting rural areas because of the ongoing rate of parcelization and fragmentation of the landscape. So question 2 is, what opportunities are there for conservation zoning to be incorporated into the comp plan update? I think the important thing to remember about the comp plan update is that theoretically anything and everything can be considered. But if you have a particular, so there's no limitation, there's no law that says, such and such kind of proposal can't be considered in a comp plan. I don't know, spaceports or something probably are not going to get approved, but anything that's remotely reasonable can certainly be considered. The other thing to think about here is, what do you mean by conservation zoning? There's dozens or hundreds of examples around the country of conservation related zoning districts, some of which are just overlays on floodplains and things like that, or that's a convenient place where a locality can manage to get that kind of thing approved without offending too many landowners. But there isn't a single meaning to a term like conservation zoning. It's something that's usually crafted locally to be appropriate to your situation. So if you're thinking about proposing an overlay district or a different zoning district for parts of the county or something, let's talk about that in more detail later. But again, that's something you would have to craft to fit your own situation. There's not a single model out there you can just pick up and drop in any location.
Scott, want to provide some clarity on that? I think there's two separate things there. One is in the growth area, we have areas in the comp plan, not zoned, but in one, sometimes there's zoned, I guess, but in the comp plan, we have areas designated for green space, and we don't have areas designated for green space in rural areas. So when you have rural subdivisions going on, there's not that on the map to go to the applicants who are applying for those subdivisions to say, hey, this is an area the county is designated for green space. So that'd be one kind of thing that could be in the comp plan, not zoning per se. But then also, speaking of history, when I look back at some of the early maps for when they were talking about creating the growth area and the rural area, I was fascinated to see that they had two categories of zoning. They had conservation and agricultural zoning, as part of, actually three, I guess, as part of that historical map that was originally proposed. And they chose not to include it. But I'm not sure what it would have meant if they had adopted it, but it might be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, and that last thing you said about what does it mean when it's actually adopted, kind of flows into question 3 there. But yeah, I don't honestly remember. That's a piece of history I had lost or forgotten about the early formation of the development areas. A lot of that was done by sort of engineering consultants who weren't really planners at all. So we're stuck today with some growth areas or development areas that were originally laid out on a zoning map that doesn't make sense the way we think about things now. But I think I forgot something I was going to say, but let me go on to number 3 and see if that brings it back. So many other localities have A1 agricultural zoning, but our primary zoning in the rural area is residential. Has there been any discussion of the benefits of adopting agricultural zoning, for example, on all current parcels in rural land use? Short answer, no, there has not. But again, there's a bigger picture answer here. There are lots of zoning districts in localities around the state, even if you look only at the rural localities around the state, that are called something like A1 or agricultural or something like a primary, what was it? Rockingham, I think it had prime agricultural zoning or something like that. But there's not really a standard. That isn't like there's a statewide agreement on what A1 would mean or A2 or what prime agricultural would mean. Every single locality crafts their own through what they want to protect and through what politically they can pull off in terms of what's allowed to be developed. That I think it was Rockingham I was looking at that had that prime agricultural district, and the purposes are all about protecting high quality agricultural soils and making sure they maintain a base for agricultural industries in their community. But if you read it carefully, once you get past the high purposes and get down to what's actually permitted, they allow unlimited 6-acre subdivisions, which if you do the math is not all that different from our strange combination of 2-acre and 21-acre divisions when you get the total number of developments on any given property. So it's labeled as prime agricultural zoning. It says its purposes are to protect agriculture, but it doesn't. So anytime you read a zoning ordinance in detail, you will often see those little discrepancies between the ideal and the actuality of what they managed to adopt. And that's certainly the case here. I'm not sure I would say that our RA zoning is purely residential, but it sure does have an awful lot of residential development potential built into it. So everything is customized for its own home. I really like question 4. What rural area zoning discrepancies need to be addressed in the zoning ordinance related to conservation? There's a principle in planning that your zoning districts should be compliant with your comp plan. So your development areas with their commercial and residential districts should permit what the comp plan says and not other stuff. Or your agricultural zoning should be mainly permitting agriculture and forestry and things like that, but not industry and commercial and maybe residential. That's the ideal. It rarely happens perfectly. So say what discrepancies need to be addressed. I mean, depending on somebody's opinion about what counts as a rural use, there are probably 20 to 50 uses currently permitted in the rural areas that maybe shouldn't be there. I have my opinion about golf courses. Nobody agrees with me. I don't think they need to be there, that's a big political ask to make a real functioning zoning ordinance with thousands upon thousands of private landowners living in it, meet those high ideals of being purely about conservation and not allowing industrial and commercial and residential uses in harmful places. So again, this is, I don't mean to be flippant about this, but this is a humongous question that I can't do justice to in 5 minutes, but maybe we could have another meeting somewhere else sometime and talk about that, piece by piece, because there's 50 some by right and 50 some uses by special use permit allowed in the RA zoning district, and that's a big question. I'll come back to that if there's time. I don't want to take too much of your time tonight. 5, since clustering is no longer enabled, are there other ways to achieve the same objective, like reducing the maximum lot size? it's not that clustering is no longer enabled at all. It's that the way it's enabled, if we make any single change to our clustering ordinance in the rural areas, which is not the only clustering ordinance we have, but it's the one we care about at the moment, then we have to come into compliance with the one that's enabled at the state level. And there is clustering enabled at the state level in a new form, but it's not appropriate to the rural areas. So one answer to this is we need to fix that at the state level and get our county and counties like us enabled to do clustering as we want to, rather than as the very suburban form of clustering with common shared open space that is currently permitted. Would reducing the maximum lot size of new rural subdivisions or lots in those subdivisions help? Yes, we recommended that in the 2003 to 5 rural area comp plan review. It got shot down by the board before we even got to a public hearing. So yeah, I think we recommend that it should happen, but nobody's ever done it. Right now, the small lots that are permitted, the development right lots, can be as small as 2 acres, but the 5 lots you're allocated are allowed to use up as much as 31 acres. So that's a little over 6. That's not very dense. And our current clustering ordinance allows the lots to work out to a density of 6 acres each too, which is a terrible clustering ordinance. But we can't change it until we get the state enabling legislation changed to allow us to alter it. So that's a challenge that the board would have to authorize us to take on and pay for the attorneys to do it, and probably do it in cooperation with other localities. If I'm taking too long and you all want to go faster, just pipe up. I don't want to ramble on forever. Put anybody to sleep. Let's see.
Scott, can I just jump in for 1 second?
Sure.
I noticed that we have a couple attendees calling in by phone. I think one is Tom, but if you're calling in by phone and you have a question, you can press *9 and Carolyn will unmute you. I think that's right. Is that Carolyn? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
So we have one hand raised now. Hold on. All right, you can go ahead and speak now if you'd like. With the last 4 digits, 2408.
Hi, this is Scott. This is Tom Olivier.
Hey, Tom.
Hi, like old times. Thanks a lot for all that presentation. And I guess one clarification, I'm probably out of date on this, but I remember over quite a few years, the PEC and other groups pushed what were rural preservation developments, I think, or PDs, where you had a property with a large acreage and a lot of development rights could agree to put the bulk of it in an easement and then have kind of a little mini subdivision where the development rights were exercised with fairly small house lots on the edge of the property somewhere. And that would save a lot of open space, but still allow people to sell house lots. From the comments at the end, though, has that gone away with the new state law that you were mentioning, or?
No, it hasn't gone away. We still have that program. I will say it's not used very often anymore because it is voluntary.
Right.
The problem is that the state adopted new. Well, let me back up for a second. There's lots of different kinds of clustering, including some clustering that can happen in the development areas where you're looking at much smaller lots on public water and sewer. And what they're trying to do is get more open space for recreation. Or they might get a density bonus by saving more open space, which gives you really, denser, tighter developments like we're trying to get. But in the rural areas, we have the same clustering ordinance we've had since 1992 or something like that. And that's the one you're talking about where, in the end, you get the same number of lots.
Right.
The ideal is that you get all those lots, instead of getting a mix of small and large lots, you get all small lots grouped together. And then the last lot is it's called the preservation tract, which is the remainder of the farm that can continue to be farmed and have a house on it and all that.
So do developers say that there's no market for the little lots, or is it just? Not enough
Well-
return cash-wise, or?
Well, there's a couple of things going on. One is, well, I've actually heard developers say that the preservation tracts of those subdivisions sell first, which is interesting. But
Yeah.
I think part of it is that a lot of the sales pitch we have is, look how much shorter your roads will be. You could save a lot of money on that. But like a lot of things in Albemarle, we make it harder to do the right thing than to do the thing we
wrong
don't
thing.
want people to do. So there's a lot more process involved
I
with the
see.
rural. And I have to say, this is the ultimate oxymoron in zoning, the rural preservation development, or RPD. It's just clustered subdivisions. Nothing's really being preserved. The number of houses isn't going down. It's just the arrangements of lots on the property overall that's changing. But so what happened is, the problem with it is not that it's gone away, but that we, by the current state enabling legislation for all clustering, we can't touch that ordinance, because as soon as we amend it, we are forced to come into compliance with this new form of, like I said, very suburban clustering that is looking at using the, instead of a preservation tract, you're getting shared residential open space that isn't dwelt on as a farm, and that can be used for like stormwater and
Right.
septic and things like that for the houses. So it's just entirely the wrong model for our rural areas.
Okay, well, that helps, thanks. That helps clear that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question about the rural preservation development? So that is still a tool that is available
Yes.
for developers to use. And why, can you say again why you don't think that they use it that much? Is it because they don't know about it? There are more hoops to go through?
There are definitely more hoops to go through, both with pre-planning before they even come into us. They need to work with us on the design. They need to get the planning commission to approve the layout, which is something that doesn't happen for any other kind of subdivision. They've got to deal with the Conservation Easement Authority, who holds the easement on the preservation tract. So it's a lot more complicated and a longer process to do things, I won't say the right way, but at least the less harmful way.
Do you think there are ways to make it easier, to sell it better, to, I see that there are things that have to be done, but how do you get the developers, to know that it's worth it?
Yeah.
To
Well,
encourage it.
There probably are. I mean, one thing, big picture, we need to realize is that a lot of the subdivision that happens in the rural areas is on properties too small to qualify for this kind of subdivision. It has to be big enough that the preservation tract is at least 40 acres. So,
So if
rough count, so 75, 80 acres is going to be the smallest you're going to be talking about to do one of these.
Well-
And most of our subdivisions, 1 and 2 and 3 lots at a time.
So if somebody, a developer does come in and they've got 40 acres or 50 acres or 100 acres, is there a way that automatically they're given this information and the planner or somebody saying, you should consider this, or like, is there a way, or is it just?
No, I see what you mean. And no, I don't think anybody, I mean, we don't get all that many large speculative multi-lot subdivisions compared to the sheer number of small ones we get. But I don't know that anybody is saying to people, why don't you not do what you've done and do an RPD instead? Part of the problem is, by the time somebody comes to us with a by right subdivision, they've spent thousands upon thousands of dollars in surveyor and engineer work in laying it out.
I wonder,
And they don't want to throw that away.
in your mind, is there a way to help educate the developers or people so they even know about this opportunity? So it seems like it's a great tool. It's just that perhaps people don't know about it, or it hasn't been sold to the developer as a good option. So are there opportunities to make this program, or?
I think there probably are opportunities, but I would like to have a conversation with some of the developers who either have done them in the past or have considered them, because my impression is that people are kind of running scared of them because there are so many more requirements to get through and they just don't want to deal with it.
It seems like an important thing to do, to sort of, because there it is. It's just perhaps a matter of like getting the information and to see where you can streamline and make it so that it's more attractive option.
Yeah.
You know, Scott, it seems to me it seems to me one of the big problems are these 21-acre lots. I think when they were originally envisioned, people had this idealized notion that people would make these 21-acre farms, and that's just not what happens.
Yeah, it never happens.
I think someone at the time said, "Oh, no one would have a 21-acre lawn."
Guess what?
Guess what? So, you know, the issue that I find is that I think the 21-acre rule, while it was well-intentioned, is just not working. And so, while I think the method, well, first of all, the methodology for calculating development rights is just bizarre. And I think there's
possibly unique.
Unique. That's a polite way to put it. It'd be nice if that was simplified in some way, but absent that, even if we calculated development rights the same way we do now, if we just said, as I said, if we say, all right, new subdivisions are 5 acres, then you just end up with the remaining parcel that, you know, in many cases that would be much larger. And it's not necessarily under easement, but it would be a large parcel with no development rights.
Right. Yeah, you don't get permanent protection you can rely on, because a rezoning could come along and people get tired of having no potential left and say, I want more development rights, and some future board could give it to them. So it's a risk, but I totally agree that the 2-acre and 21-acre pattern that we're generating with our current zoning ordinance is not going to lead us to a sustainable rural area. But on the other hand, go back to my experience, or my team's experience from 2003 when we started that rural area review. And the first thing we did was hold a work session with the board and the planning commission. And we had all kinds of information built up and all kinds of plans and ideas. And we sat down and a board member said, you will not touch development rights. And it was over. And
That's
we spent the rest of that three-year period writing that plan, trying to come up with 50 other ideas that would make some small difference when the battle was lost.
It was a very different board then too. I mean,
Yeah,
that was. Yeah.
But you've also got a much more riled up and active opposition to any rural area regulation now, I think, even more so than then. Okay, I should probably go back to my questions. Where am I? Was I on 7? Oh, 6. Could the county require that the ratio of length to width not exceed a certain percentage? To some degree, we do. There are provisions in the ordinance that I don't fully understand that are about what are called odd-shaped lots. And then beyond that, every new lot that's created has to have certain setbacks and certain building, we call it a building site, but we don't require that people use it, but they have to show that they have one. This could get into a lot of really complicated math, and it could probably adjust things a little bit, but I think it could get really, really complicated and not achieve very much, because it's, the overall density and the pattern in the landscape, that's what we need to deal with. And I'm not sure we could make a really big hit with changing parcel shape or proportions. Maybe there's somebody in the math department who could prove me wrong on that. It's not my strength. 7, other than lower density, are there mechanisms for encouraging retention of the natural landscape in the rural areas, such as clustering of development? Conservation easements, that's about it right now. There's very, very little that zoning can do or typically does in a regional locality other than density requirements to affect the form of rural landscapes. And that's not even natural landscape. And we just don't get into how you manage the land. It's partly the right to farm law and those related measures. I don't know of a zoning provision that requires that people maintain anything close to what we would call a natural landscape. We're dealing with density and then crossing our fingers, really. I hate to be negative about it, but in reality, that's what zoning is getting at, is density and commercial uses and things like that, but not the character of the landscape on top of that layout of ownership lines. So are there mechanisms? Yeah, I think probably conservation easements are the only really strong tool we have right now, because they can control development and require certain forms of land management. Ag 4 districts don't do that because they're temporary and they don't impose requirements for how you manage. 8, what is a rural area subdivision? I wasn't sure exactly what the question was here. There's something called a rural division, which is just one type of subdivision. When I say type of subdivision, the number of lots you're creating and the form of them and things like that can affect exactly which requirements of the subdivision ordinance you're subject to. And I'll just pull out a number 75 or something like that of items on the checklist that a regular subdivision has to do. Some of those items in that checklist will come off if you're doing a family subdivision, which is a subdivision where a family holds land for a while, gives it to a family member, and then they hold it for a while. A rural division, if that's what the question's about, is a subdivision of either 2 lots or 2 or more lots, I can't remember, where all the resulting lots are at least 5 acres. So there's less concern about making sure you can fit well and septic in there. And so there's a few more restrictions you're not subject to, or like checklist items on the plat that you're not subject to, but these are all details. The pattern of lot sizes laid out in the zoning ordinance is really what's important in terms of the level of overall development. You know, the different kinds of subdivision applications are just different checklists of platting requirements. If that's not what that question was about, I'll be glad to come back to it. 9, for smaller properties where an easement may not be practical, is there an administrative way to abandon development rights? Not that I know of. We have talked about that before. We've never found anything. On the other hand, I will say that we have some awfully small easements. We have some 9 and 10 acre easements in locations where that makes sense, either because they form a bridge between 2 other larger protected properties, or because they're on an entrance corridor in a historic district or something like that. But just a way to, go to the county and sign a permanent contract that says, I hereby give up my development rights. No, I don't know if we're even enabled to do that under state law, but I wish we had that tool because I know some people would do it. Let's see, 10. If property is truly conservation agricultural use, is there a way to voluntarily reduce development rights to 0 so no residence is permitted? Again, conservation easements are your main tool. We rarely see an easement where somebody is willing to give up all residences. I think we have 2 or 3 out of the 180 that the easement authority holds. And we may get a couple more soon, but it's pretty unusual. But, if somebody's willing to do that, a conservation easement is probably the best way. All right, I feel like I've taken too long here. Is it okay if I move on to the next category? Everybody?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
All right. I don't mean to take too long, and if you've just let me know.
No.
More detail or less, but.
You're the main attraction, Scott, so.
Yeah, you're not taking too much of our time. So
okay, I wasn't sure if you had lots of.
We're interested in these questions and really are happy you're here to help us understand them. Thank you.
I'll just keep going then. So this section I think was called land use when I first got it, and it was being difficult and relabeled it as use value taxation because I think it really holds people back in understanding what the situation is with land taxation, because people move here and somebody says to them, hey, you got to get in land use. And they say, okay, I want to be in land use. And they go to the assessor's office and say, put me in land use. But they never get the big picture. The big picture is what everybody in Albemarle calls land use. which was really confusing to me when I moved here because it's like land use. Most of your land is getting used. What are you talking about? Big picture, this is called use value taxation in general, meaning that rather than having your land, if you've got 200 acres in the rural area and you're taxed on that at the residential rate for everything it might be built out to be, but you're trying to live on a farm income, you're probably going to lose that land because you can't afford to pay the taxes. Use value taxation is taxing the land at the value for which it's actually used. So if you've got a large parcel with forest on it, or if you're running a farm, the assessor's office can tax you at a rate based on the soil productivity of your land for that use, which is going to be a lot less than the full residential rate. So the idea is not to tax people off their land if they're trying to do agriculture or forestry or something like that. Now, I will say that the background of this is very much about extractive rural industries, which is fine. That's one of our goals, but there's not been a lot of thought put into how to make this work overall for conservation activities. Conservation easements don't really fit this category. They're just taxed a different way. Excuse me. Okay. To what degree is open space a recognized land use designation in Albemarle? Okay, this is a confusing question because I'm not sure if we're talking about taxes or zoning or comp plans. The term open space has always been really difficult for me because it means so many things to so many people. Open space is a designated comprehensive plan use category for parts of the development areas that are undevelopable and good for recreation. Open space is also a tax category in the rural areas. It's like those use value tax categories, but it's supposed to be recognizing parcels that are dedicated to conservation uses. We can talk later more about how exactly you qualify for that. But yeah, if the question is about, is it a recognized land use or a recognized tax category designation, it is, and it's one of the 4 types of use value taxation that the county permits.
Yeah, that is what it refers to. Yeah.
Okay. So then the follow-up question, what are the criteria for open space with land use assessment? I'll take that first question part. There are very defined qualifying factors in the county's tax code for how you qualify for each of these. For agriculture, let me back up. Each of them has a minimum acreage and then something you have to do. So for example, the agriculture category, you have to have 5 acres in agricultural production. If you've got a 5-acre parcel and a house with a huge yard on it, you might not make it. You have to have 5 acres in that production category, and you have to earn a certain gross amount of money from your agricultural production, whether that's letting Joe down the road cut your hay or whether you're actually growing corn or something on your own. You have to hit that minimum income to be considered productive enough to join that category. Forestry category, you need 20 acres dedicated to that use, and you need to have a forest management plan. A lot of people have the impression that it means that you have to harvest every X number of years. That's not really the case. I'd like to see somebody really push the limits of that with an application that says, yeah, I plan to harvest my trees in 200 years. Works for me. But generally speaking, it's, I have a plan prepared by a forester that says, I'm going to cut these pines in 20 years and those oaks in 50, and I'm going to replant to X. And as long as that land is forested and has decent forestal soils, and you've got the acreage, you can qualify. Horticulture is weird. I think we have almost none of that. And then there's the open space category, which the qualifying factors for that, you need to be in an open space use agreement, which is one of the questions farther down, but I'll get to in a minute. Or you can be an agricultural and forestal district, which is a complicated story I'll talk about if we have time, or you can be in a conservation easement. Although in Albemarle, at least, we don't use the conservation easement qualification because we just have a different way of lowering the taxes on easement land. So anyway, you have to have a minimum acreage for each category, think it's 20 for open space. And you have to, there's something you have to do. You have to produce something or have a plan to produce something, or you have to be enrolled in a conservation program that's defined. The natural follow-up to that is, are there other ways that we can get people to qualify? I would really like to find some, especially for habitat restoration type projects, but we have not yet found an equivalent of something that is standardized and easily measured that the assessor's office could use. If you've got 5 acres of good ag soils and you're growing corn on it, everybody can see that. If you've got 20 acres in a forestry plan with trees on that land, everybody can easily see and measure that. If you're in an Ag 4 district, you just call Scott and say, is this guy in or out? I say, he's in, he's fine. For something as diverse as the idea of habitat restoration and native meadows and all that, where a lot of it's done voluntarily without any kind of legal structure to it, it's really hard to boil that down to an equally standardized yes, no kind of decision for the assessor's office. That's something I wish I had the time to work on and fix that. I know Chess Godal has said the same thing, but we just haven't had the time or opportunity to try to pursue that and make it better yet. If you all can recommend some policies to the board to do that, I think that would be great.
Yeah, this is Lonnie. Related to the next piece, and related to the suggestion that we've had on this policy would be the conservation. And as you know, I'm a director on the conservation districts.
Right.
One, most of these people that don't do them voluntarily. Well, sorry, people that do them voluntarily but with public money. It's my based upon the new language that was included in the enabling language. It's my understanding of this new language that those people should qualify. For the people that do this voluntarily without public money, I've long thought that they should be able to contact NRCS or the conservation district, have us write a conservation plan, have us verify their practice as if they took money, and then qualify them that way. So then you would have standardization because they would be following the guidelines of whatever program they're qualifying under, even though they didn't accept money for that program.
And I agree that would be a great way to do it. From the limited amount of time that we had to dig into that a few years back, and talking to Anne about it a bit, it seemed like there was almost too much diversity in what those plans are. I mean, a farm conservation plan could be so many different things that we weren't sure what we were getting in return for the tax break. So I don't know if there's a way to narrow it to a certain kind of requirement. This is a really interesting potential, way to support conservation in the rural areas. I just wish we had more time to actually work on it. Maybe this will become part of Kim's work plan 20 or 50 or 100 years from now. But
well, I mean, I think this is really important. And how can we push this and push for more staff time to be made available to get it going? Because you see it everywhere where people have these 20-acre, where they're mowing grass or they're cutting hay, but it could be really important habitat, and that's valuable and important. And
right.
I think that's more valuable than cutting hay and having the hay just sit out there in the field.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people maybe they fixed this now, but there are some people that have open space use value taxation that have no buffers whatsoever, aren't in compliance with any kind of BMPs, and yet they're getting a significant tax break on their property for doing nothing.
Yep.
That's really troubling to me when we have other people that are afraid of applying for EQIP because they think, oh, well, if the assessor comes by and sees a bunch of native grasses, he'll try to get me, he'll take me out of land use, and I'll have to pay back taxes.
And I totally understand that fear. And I think it would probably come down to Pete Lynch, the assessor. You know, if you all or somebody can talk directly to Pete. I've talked to him about it, but we haven't really resolved anything. You know, if somebody can get Pete to issue a statement or guidelines or something so that people know what is going to happen, that would probably help relieve that anxiety.
I mean, I think at least updating the language, I don't know if it's been done yet, but at least updating the language on the county website so that it has the new enabled language that includes the specific language about soil and water conservation programs would be a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, and you know, like I said, verifying that Pete and his people are behind that and understand what the options are so that they can keep people in those programs when they're doing good stuff like that. But as I'm not an expert on the tax stuff. I've had to learn a bunch of it kind of piecemeal, but I'm not an expert. And I think Pete really is an expert. And if somebody could talk directly to him, if you wanted to send a person or a couple of people from the committee to have a discussion with him, that might break something loose.
Well, that sounds like that should be our first step. That we thank you
That's
for
what
that.
I'd recommend. And the other, Christine, for your question of how do we get at this? You know, one thing is go ahead and talk to Pete. The other thing is when we get to the upcoming comp plan revision, which is being led by my coworker Rachel Falkenstein. I don't know a lot about the schedule of that yet, or how much we're going to dig into the rural stuff. But I believe from what I've heard Rachel say that it's going to be a complete revision and not just a development areas revision. So that means there's an opportunity there to write hopefully some fairly pointed and specific policies about fixing the open space program into the next draft of the RA comp plan. And your committee should have a chance to comment on that draft.
Scott, I have a question from Tom in the attendees.
Go ahead, Tom.
Tom, you're muted.
Tom, you need to unmute. There you go.
There we go.
Okay. Scott, you know, we've on the Natural Heritage Committee, we've thought about the open space in terms of kind of biodiversity conservation. But if we go back to the landscape sector group that we were involved with in developing the adopted draft of the climate change program, I'm wondering if the open space category under land use isn't due for really a kind of acreage great big expansion because of its value in promoting carbon sequestration.
That's a great
and
idea.
I'm wondering if, you know, that might not really foster kind of a further recognition, whether it's both zoning and comp planning or not, of conservation area or maybe ecosystem service area or sequestration area as a desired use. And given the county's board's claim, you know, climate action is the #1 priority, and we're committed to being carbon neutral by 2050 or a bit after. It seems to me it implies sort of establishing an acreage in open space for carbon sequestration purposes as a worthy goal in the upcoming comp plan, and that could have enormous symbiotic co-benefits with biodiversity conservation if open space for sequestration could be really recognized and pushed as a goal in the new plan.
Right, and not only that, but FES is about to hire a new climate protection plan manager, and I don't know who that'll be, but I would, from the discussions I've had with Greg, the FES manager, it sounds like they're pretty excited about the idea of trying to find more ways to implement sequestration programs. So whoever that person is, hopefully will be amenable to really jumping on that in phase 2 of the climate plan. But yeah, as you say, if we get that in the comp plan first, then that's even more reason to do so. But I totally agree with what you're saying with this.
Good. It seems to me this would be an active step. In other words, not just protect the areas against open space against being chipped away endlessly by development pressure, but saying if we want to be climatically sustainable, we have to commit and pursue active preservation and perhaps even, restoration of open space areas and ecosystems.
Right. I mean, I can't remember if it was who it was before. It was saying that it's better to protect some of these resources than give people a tax break for hay that doesn't get used. But I certainly would rather see well-designed plantings of Lonnie's 21-acre yards than paying somebody to cut and abandon hay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Well,
There were
I
the
think-
victory gardens in the climate plan to plant trees on 20-acre subdivision lots. It's kind of consistent with a lot of the things people have said today.
Yeah, and I think it would provide complementary benefits in terms of soil and water conservation as well. I would hate to see it be only trees, though. I mean, I think warm season grasses have been shown to have just as great, if not greater in some cases, impacts on carbon sequestration.
And other benefits,
Yeah.
I think we would I would really appreciate if somebody would give us the time to work on this the right way, which means not just this committee, which is great, and planning staff, but also assessor staff and the county attorney's office, so that we can figure out what we are and are not enabled to do already. And if we need to lobby for any new or different enabling legislation, so we can approach this in a less, I don't know, probably change how I say that, but should we approach this in a more thoughtful and complete way rather than just making minor tweaks? But that takes time, and a lot of our time in the last many years has been dedicated to urban design in the development areas, and we haven't had the time or the staff dedicated to significant policy development like this in the rural areas. But I would love to see it happen. And this committee can advocate for it through the comp plan.
Is there a way to advocate for it before the comp plan? Like how, like Natural Heritage Committee could have some of these different players come and talk with us at our meetings to get dialogue going and awareness going. Are there other things that the committee could do? Like Christine's great about writing letters to, or at least initiating writing letters to different people to start asking for new things to be considered. I mean, I'm hearing it's complex. So,
well, it is complex.
Can the committee do to help move it forward?
Well, I mean, Tom will remember this and smirk at me, but what I always used to say to the Natural Heritage Committee was go back to your original task list from 300 years ago, whatever it was. And there's a list of things you all are supposed to do. And one of them is advise the board on policy.
Right.
And one way to do that, we've already talked about, which is when, Rachel starts at the comp plan review and Kim comes to it and says, okay, we're going to have Rachel do a presentation and you can respond with what you want to add. You can, if there is something urgent or something really important to you all, go ahead and just make a report or a plea to the Board of Supervisors on something you feel is critical. Now, it may be that they hear you and say, okay, but we'll deal with that during the comp plan because we don't have time to do it as a separate process. But that's, part, or maybe it's more appropriate to do it through your annual report. But, Kim and Charles and others can figure out the most appropriate way to send that message, but certainly advising the board on critical issues is one of your tasks.
Well, if I'm still unmuted, I'll comment that sentence that Scott alluded to advise the board from time to time on matters arising relative to biodiversity, conservation. That was put in so the committee would not be in a spot where it could only sort of speak after being spoken to. It could initiate communications with the board whenever they thought there was a serious issue. And Scott's been, in the past, heavily involved with comp plan updates, and some of the rest of us were too. And one of the things back when we were getting biodiversity into the comp plan back in the 90s, I kept I'll just throw this out, I kept a mailing list I had about 15 people on it, and I watched the plan process and noted when there were work sessions, what topics, when some of them were being held, where things relevant to biodiversity were being considered. And then I would send out emails to people asking them to write to planning commissioners, staff, and board, pointing out how this was relevant to biodiversity and offering ideas on things to bring into the plan. And a whole lot of that worked really well. And I talked to Christine about this the other day. I'm going to be starting a new list for the new comp plan update, where I'll be trying to tell people when there are going to be events of relevance and opportunities to comment. And if anybody on the committee or any of the sort of friends of the committee on the email list would like to be included on that, I'll be happy to put you on it so you get notices of when there are opportunities, and my own sort of, no doubt, somewhat flawed but personal take on how the plan is developing. So I'll write to you all after, in the next day, and if you want, let me know you'd like to be added to it. But there's always a chance to send emails to the people who are developing the plan, and it helps to do that along the way.
We also have Rod and Maggie Walker that would like to speak.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I have a related topic I'd like to just toss on the table and hope that as the plan is revised, that people will consider this. And that is, in the next year or two or three, there's going to be vehicles, if you will, financial vehicles developed, whereby forest owners will be able to sell carbon credits into the carbon credit markets. And just as the comment was made here about concerns about landowners, participating in conservation practices, concerned about losing their land use assessment benefits, this will be another category potentially of that kind of issue. And it would be great if this could be explicitly addressed and hopefully mean that landowners can do both. They can both participate in a carbon credit program as well as maintain their assessment status.
That's a really good point. It's one of the reasons we need to do frequent comp plan updates is to deal with emerging issues like that. And from what I've been hearing, that, as you say, it is something that's going to be increasingly possible and popular in places like this. So that's a really good point. It's something that we should try to address in the plan.
Yeah, it'd be great to get into it up front because landowners are going to start seeing this coming up literally perhaps in the next year. And they're all going to start asking questions. Worse yet, if there's a risk to their land use status, heaven forbid that they should sign up for one of these programs and then discover later on that they've got a problem.
That's a good point too. And once again, I would encourage you all to, as committee members, that if you have questions about this, to contact Pete Lynch. He's a really nice guy. He knows these programs inside and out, and he's very helpful. And if you want to have a delegated person or a couple of people go talk to Pete and find out more details, I'm sure he'd be willing to talk to you. I don't know what his schedule is like. He might be able to come to a future meeting, but you can certainly ask.
It sounds like we need to be proactive, and I think you've given us some important things to be working on. And thank you, Rod, for mentioning this as well. We have good reason to speak to the board and to reach out to Pete Lynch. Thank you.
Another thing that I would mention also with respect to, what the committee can do, I think it would be helpful to have an understanding of what other localities have done if they have, expanded or different criteria for open space, for example, than what is in the state enabling legislation. That would be super helpful, I think, as staff for us to know and to have some examples in our pocket, and not that we would necessarily do the exact same thing, but that would be helpful. And for these new issues moving forward, just to see what that looks like and what's been successful in other localities in Virginia.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's something we always do if we're doing policy development the right way. is find out who else is doing what in Virginia. And again, that's something we need staff time to dedicate to that we don't necessarily have right now. So that's something, again, that you all could raise as an issue in communications with the board.
Scott, if I could share my screen.
I'm sorry. Yeah, let me drop this here. Hang on.
Okay.
There it is. Stop share. All right.
Okay. See if it allows me to share this. Something that you might find fascinating. This was the original land use plan for
Yeah.
Albemarle County.
Oh my God,
And,
yeah.
and I don't know if you can see, I can sort of like, maybe I can zoom in here, but if you look under there, you have, it has commercial zone, agriculture, conservation, parks and floodplains, water supply. So it's interesting that the original map for the rural area had these different zones in it. But they were ultimately dropped.
Yeah, and just be careful with the terminology. Again, these are comp plan designations, not zoning districts. In a land use plan map. This map is terrifying to me. This level of development would have basically destroyed the county. But yeah, the 70s era comp plans for the county. There's a few different ones, and they're all equally terrifying.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not saying that this particular land use plan would be one to adopt, but as you've said before, I mean, one of the things that I find, I don't know, a little problematic is the fact that we don't have you look at the growth area and in terms of the comp plan, there's all these pretty colors and mosaic of different colors about the uses that we want. In the rural area, it's all one color. I
have agreed with that for at least 20 years, and we talked about that during the previous, the Ancient History 2003 RA update, and a couple of us in staff advocated for dividing the rural areas into management zones based upon their natural resource needs, and it went nowhere. And we went right back to the 690 square miles of blank land use map. And I totally agree that it would be one way or another, it would be appropriate to more carefully and thoughtfully designate our rural areas, whether or not that, even if that doesn't change zoning, just the way that you could dedicate ACE funding or stream buffer funding or something like that by having a stronger, more detailed land use plan for the rural areas would be great.
Yeah, and that's another thing where I feel like researching what other localities are doing, because I've looked at the map in Greene from my work in land conservation, and Greene County has a conservation overlay. I don't know if it's just like a comp plan thing or if it actually translates into the zoning ordinance, like Scott said, but it would be helpful to know, I mean, what our adjacent counties and other counties are doing and how they've succeeded to help inform that process. And Scott, you may have done some of that research in your previous effort.
Yeah, 20 years ago.
Yeah, so it's probably changed also.
Yeah.
How does one begin that search? Is there somebody who would be in the know? Maybe the Piedmont Environmental Council, perhaps they have some information.
Well, I'm sure they do, and they have a lot of expertise, but also you can just go to every locality's website and pull down their comp plan, pick the 6 or whatever counties around you and download those and look through them and see what they say. Look at their land use maps, which are an official designation of what that locality's policy states is proper for any given area of the county. Download their zoning maps, which tell you a lot about their layout, but then also read the ordinance. Just because it says, hey, this is, PA prime agricultural zoning, don't believe it. Look at the text of the zoning ordinance for that locality and see what it really permits. It'll surprise you sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point, Scott. I mean, there's one locality that fascinates me. I wouldn't want us to be Loudoun County, mind you,
No.
but it not by any stretch. But it is a fascinating one because they do deal with a lot of these same issues that we're dealing with, and they have tried to address some of that stuff in their comprehensive plan. So it's one of the localities I find fascinating to look at.
Loudoun has a problem of wildly swinging back and forth from very pro-conservation to very anti-conservation. And so they propose good things and then they get killed. They had a really nice ordinance in development. Actually, it got adopted. It was a better stream buffer ordinance than ours because it included not only the streams and the nearby, banks and all that, but also the adjacent critical slopes into an overlay district that controlled land use and erosion and all that near streams. And it was really interesting. I can't remember too many details because it was probably 15 years ago, but the Pro-Conservation Board adopted it. The Pro-Conservation Board got voted out. The Anti-Conservation Board did a little research and figured out that there was a small legal mistake in the advertising of the public hearings for the adoption of that ordinance, invalidated the ordinance, and it never came back. So you, yeah, they're not very steady about their policies like we are.
Scott, do you have time there were a few more of those questions on that
Yeah,
list.
let me just run through those real quick. I don't mean to take this long, but oh yeah. What is an open space use agreement? An open space use agreement is a contract between a landowner and the county for the landowner not to develop their property. It's not permanent like a conservation easement. It's they run in periods of 4 to 10 years. The only reason people do them is to qualify for that open space tax category. And they're extremely restrictive. I actually dissuade some people from doing these because you literally cannot change. And you couldn't build a bathroom extension on your house. These things are so restrictive. So, but on the other hand, back before we got our story straight about which ones we would accept, we had people applying to do these who had no development potential left. And so they were qualifying for that open space rate without actually doing any conservation. All they were giving up was the ability to enlarge their house, and how likely was that? So it's a contract for the purposes of qualifying for a lower tax rate. 4, why do we allow family subdivisions of open space parcels? Isn't the whole point to avoid subdivision? I think there's a slight misunderstanding here. We allow family subdivisions in the agricultural and forestal districts, which are another voluntary but not permanent conservation program. The logic behind that was that that program was supposed to help people maintain their family farms, and does that by heavily restricting subdivision. But the people who set it up, whenever that was, 80s, I guess, didn't want to prevent families with family owned land from giving land to sons, daughters, cousins, whatever, who were going to be there, helping to maintain family continuity and keeping people on the land to work it. So there is a logic there for why family subdivisions make sense, but it only worked if you actually apply the state standards for holding land before the sale and keeping it in the family after the sale, which we do. The state allows you to require people to have had it for 15 years and to keep it for 15 years after, or less. But so ours is 4 before and 4 after, which is better than it used to be. 5, are there other counties in Virginia that have actually used the open space designation to conserve and protect natural areas? I don't know. Like Kim said, this is research we need to do. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer on that one, but I would like to find out as well. 6, since other land use categories besides open space have such prescribed qualifications, could we simply opt out of ones like forestry and required parcels to qualify under open space instead where we'd have more control over the criteria? Possibly. It's a weird policy statement for a county that says it supports agriculture and forestry to not allow people to be taxed at those rates when they're doing those activities. And also, as we've discussed earlier, the qualification process for open space is kind of a mess right now. And I wouldn't want to make that kind of change until we get that fixed. It's a good thought. Well, it's a good thought to fix open space. I'm not sure whether or not it's a good thought to no longer offer the forestry and ag categories, but certainly the whole program is ripe for fixing. Onto the building permit questions. 1, is there any guidance for contractors and builders about environmental protections? No, not that I know of, and I've dug through our new county website and not found anything specific on that, except to say that people are certainly required to comply with the water protection ordinance, the critical slopes ordinance, all those things, the protections we already have in place. And most contractors at least are already pretty aware of those things. So compliance is required, but maybe we're not so good on education out in front. Something we could improve at. Do building permits for residences or outbuildings and farm properties have different rules than residential only properties? Doesn't quite work that way. The rules for farm buildings in the rural area zoning district are different. Residences are not treated indifferently. If you subdivide a lot or even just build a house on an existing lot, it's not any different because you're in the rural areas or because you're farming or anything like that. You're still subject to all the building code requirements. Agriculture related buildings, this is not garages, this is barns, hay sheds, run-in sheds, things like that, are subject to lesser requirements. There's a big form you have to fill out, but basically it's a waiver of the building code as long as you sign an affidavit that it's an ag only building and that you list the kinds of uses it's being put to. So just farm buildings, not residences there. 2A, since the 2 acres a home is on do not qualify for land use, does the county consider that 2 acres not exempt from the water protection ordinance? These are just two separate things. Land use qualification is a tax program. Water protection ordinance is it's not zoning, but it is a land use or land management ordinance that applies to the whole county in different ways. They're just unrelated. Once a farm has been converted to residential use, what requirements are in place to require mitigation for farm, right, I remember this one, farm ponds, interpolate placed so-called farm roads, and restoration of buffers. This one, I'm sorry, I didn't get a good answer on. I wanted to, I just ran out of time to talk to the necessary people, including Frank Pohl in engineering. Lonnie and I have talked about this in the past after a few hideous examples of so-called farm owners making so-called farm roads very cheaply and then doing the subdivision that miraculously followed those same roads. I just don't remember off the top of my head if there's any mitigation afterwards, but we just need to talk to Frank Pohl about that and possibly zoning. So sorry, I don't have a better answer on that one yet.
Yeah, Scott, a related piece to that was clarifying on the one before about stream buffers. When we're applying the water protection ordinance, I know we have exemptions for agriculture. When a property is in, typically, although there are separate programs, we often use land use as sort of a metric of, is this agriculture, is this not agriculture?
Right, yeah.
And so it seems, it appears as if, and it could be wrong, that we seem to apply it on a parcel level, so that I've seen instances, for example, where a residence is built on an agricultural parcel and there are no stream buffers between the house and the stream. And maybe those are just old parcels and we don't do that anymore, but it does seem like, wouldn't we be able to require stream buffers at least on the 2 acres the house is on, since that's not even, land use doesn't even consider that agricultural.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And whether or not it was tied to that box that's taxed at the full rate for the dwelling, yeah, it would be ideal that whenever a house is built or some other use is put in place, that we're able to require people to put in or restore buffers. No, I don't believe we do that now.
I like my album sticker.
I'm sorry, somebody said something, but I couldn't quite hear it.
I think it was a child in the background somewhere.
Oh.
I think that was my kid, sorry.
Well, maybe they had a good question, I don't know. Again, I'm not an expert, but the way I understand the revised water protection ordinance to work, there's this weird gap because there's this clear exemption for agriculture and forestry. And there's a clear requirement for buffers to be not impacted when there's a site plan required for development, which there rarely is in the rural areas. Site plans for development usually involve commercial, industrial, institutional uses. They don't really get at subdivisions. And so there's this gray area in the middle that I totally don't understand, that is what happens on rural land that is getting residential development done. My impression is that if there's not decent vegetation in that buffer, there's no requirement that it be created just because there's a building permit for a house or a subdivision for a lot. I could be wrong on that. I need to talk to Frank Pohl again, or Kim and I can do that. But I think there's kind of that gray area in the middle where ideally, yes, we would have more buffer restoration going on in reaction to building or subdivision, but it's not really required. That might be an opportunity to strengthen the water protection ordinance in an important way. I think that was the last one.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott, so much for answering those questions and helping us understand the role that we can play. And I think that we do have some things that we can do here. And I think it's been helpful for me to hear your perspective and your insight. So, and if we have more questions, maybe we can, come at you with an email or something like to that effect.
All of you are welcome individually or as a group to send me emails if you have questions. And if I don't know the answers, I'll figure out who does, or if there's something that, probably even better to include Kim. So I know she's really tight on time with all the work she's doing right now, but obviously she'd want to stay involved too. But if there's anything we can do to answer questions, it's always, that's part of what we're here for. So, but thank you for giving me the time to respond to all those questions in person. It's helpful to do it that way.
Thanks, Scott. I learn something every time I talk to you.
Sometimes it's even
Thank
true.
you so much. Really.
Scott, yeah, thank you.
All right,
was
thanks. I
great.
will talk to you all later, but
Great.
feel free to send me questions if you have them.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right. That was very helpful. These topics are very complicated, and that's one thing that is reinforced after listening to Scott, give his descriptions, and I see there's much more to be learned about the ins and outs of all of it. But we only have short half hour left, and so I believe what's left on our agenda is we were going to just give an update on our, in our working groups, and then also talk about, for these subcommittees, the new rules for the pilot program for actually having a subcommittee meeting. And I believe that's probably all we are going to have time for. So, but I'm going to just go ahead and talk about the Education Committee met on Monday, and we had a good conversation about, we talked about the landowner welcome packet that we would like to get out. And so Michael's not here, but he did volunteer to take a stab at the cover letter. And we still, I know, Kim, I think you had looked at this question about, is it possible to generate that list? And it sounds like that is a possibility that can happen. And so we thought if we could get something, just, we don't know how much it's going to cost. If we can get the list, perhaps we could start with those landowners in the conservation focus areas, and we could simply give them a one-page letter and send them to a place where they can find the resources, or the possibility of putting in, for example, the ACE brochure or some other brochures that may be available to us where the organizations wants to get them out, and we could be a vehicle for getting them out.
You can put together mailing lists from the county GIS.
Yeah, and so we were just hoping that this could be generated automatically, and it sounds like those lists can be automatically generated once if there's this land sale. So, Kim, did you?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to jump in. Yes, I did, and I dropped the ball on that, so I apologize for that. But I did originally reach out to our GIS department, and we can do that. I need to provide them with the criteria of what area we want to focus on. So if that's all the conservation focus areas or one in particular to start with, but we can definitely do that.
Great. So we are making progress. And so we had a discussion about that welcome packet, and Emily took some really great notes for our meeting. And so those notes that's all going to be sent back to the county along with the recording of the meeting. So that's all available for people to look at. And we also talked about the no mowing.
Oh, sorry, Christine, before you move on, there's a comment from Rod and Maggie in the Q&A that they would love to have Blue Ridge prison brochures included.
Fantastic. That's really great. And there's also the Plant Northern Natives campaign. And so I think that we have this possibility of sticking some brochures in there, but that is great news.
I also didn't get it. I did not get your recording from your meeting Monday.
I gotta send it to you.
Okay, okay, because I won't be able to upload it till next week now, and it has to be up within 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
It's okay. It's okay this time. I think it'll be fine. But I work Monday through Thursday.
Okay, I will make
Yeah.
sure that it gets done in a timely way. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. No problem.
Okay. And then we also talked about the mowing, the conservation mowing areas in Darden Park that we had that I had the conversation with Jim Barber and Jeremy, who is the manager over at Darden. And this idea that, what we can do to help spread the word that those certain areas that won't be mowed, so that it can be sort of a positive, encourage a positive response to that, because the fear is that people will be unhappy with the fact that there are areas that are not being mowed. So perhaps one of the things I think I'm going to do is reach out to Rivanna Master Naturalist and maybe even to the Bird Club to invite them to actually go to Darden to enjoy those spaces and take pictures and give us some feedback about how it progresses over the course of the year.
Do some signs need to be posted?
Well, I did talk to Jim Barber about that, and I gave him some examples of signs, and I'm not sure where he is with that. I mean, we also just talked about the possibility of just a printed piece of paper that could be posted in the kiosk that would actually explain what's happening.
Where are the areas? Where are these? I just can't picture. I'm not sure where they are on the park property.
Yeah, the one that we had spoken about is there's the power line easement that's between the tennis court and there's a soccer field.
Yeah.
And there's a place with it's sort of a steep, not really steep, but there's an incline. So there's a kind of a wet area, and then it goes up to the soccer field. So it would be that area. And then also around, it looks like there's a private residence in Darden or a house. And along that, it's up on a hill. So along those hills, and then looking down into the, I believe it's a baseball field, there's quite a steep hill down to it. And so not mowing in those steep areas.
It just seems like the perfect type of place for an interpretive educational sign.
Yeah, and I did talk to Jim Barber about that, and I offered my help, and I gave him some suggestions. And the last I heard, he's like, "Great, this is what we're gonna do." But I haven't heard anything back.
I'll talk to Jeremy.
Oh, great! Fantastic. Yeah.
You could also take that a step farther, because the county actually qualifies as a VCAP applicant. So they could actually even, as opposed to just not mowing a place, actually restore it with native wildflowers and put in educational signage. And in fact, things in public view are ranked higher in the VCAP scoring system than residential applicants. So it could be an opportunity, particularly if it's placed in such a way as to mitigate stormwater or deal with like runoff from a soccer field or something that might be loaded with excess fertilizer.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that, we wanted to get the program going this year. And so, but I agree that the signage is going to be really important. And I can go ahead and relay that to Jim Barber as well. But we said in the meantime, maybe hopefully Cape can put out some information about that area as well. But as much as we can also spread the word through these organizations about, and of course, we don't even know what it's going to look like at the end of the summer, right? What's going to actually grow. So this is all going to be an interesting experiment. But my approach was, let's get it started, because otherwise, it takes time because they had already, Jim Barber said that there were some discussions about turning that hillside into a meadow and using herbicide to kill the grass, which it can be done, right? But it takes time and resources to do it. So
How about a mechanism that doesn't involve spraying herbicide everywhere, which is plenty available and not going to cause that excess pollution? It's just not the right choice.
Well, I could go into more detail on that, but we have other agenda items. But if you'd like to talk about that more and the other options, I'd be glad to talk about sometime.
Yeah, I think the exciting thing is that the county, Jim's excited about it, Jeremy's excited about it. So I think there is a window of opportunity to really move this forward. And they are already doing it in some places. So I think they are open to doing it more. And it's really...
The hard part is to keep them from mowing in the fall, because they're going to want to tidy everything up for the winter. And you want to leave it over the winter. And
yeah,
mow.
well, we definitely, we had those discussions.
Oh, good. Okay.
February.
Yeah. Good.
Wait till February. All right, so that's my report from the Education Subcommittee. And I don't know if individually anybody made progress on any of those. And I know that Leah has made some progress with her work. Leah, do you want to share now?
Sure. Before I do, Kim, do you want to say anything about what you're doing with your wildlife quarter project?
I mean, there's not a whole lot of progress that's been made. Well, there is, but so I guess just really quick, I can share that our group has continued to meet with PEC and Wild Virginia and Leah and VDOT also. And so we are kind of talking through different options and potentially an app for doing a survey and a protocol for doing a survey along that stretch of 29 to get better systematically collected collision data. And so we've been considering that. And I think I mentioned last time that 8 camera traps are out now. So starting to get some information on what's using those existing crossings. And there's also a researcher from Virginia Tech who studies wildlife and road crossings, and he's interested in getting involved and helping support a project too. So that will be really helpful, I think.
Great.
So on my end, in terms of looking at wildlife corridors, I've been working on several different aspects for the northwest area of the county. And I wanted to update you all on one area in particular tonight and then get your input. It's something that I've investigated and I've talked to a number of people about, and I feel like I'm missing a little piece of the puzzle, and I don't know what it is, but I'm thinking maybe you all will pick up on something I'm not getting. And if it's okay, I'd like to share my screen with you. So I'll go on and do that and show you all some info. Okay, now this is in my way, darn it. No, now it's going good. Okay, so the area is is the intersection of Highway 240 and 250. Now, people are familiar with Highway 250 in general, but Highway 250, as you head west, for those of you that may not know, as you head west out of Charlottesville, it goes through Ivy, and then it hits this intersection here where you then go into Crozet, and you can either take this kind of back road into Crozet, which is, we call it three-notched road in the local area, but technically it's Highway 240. And then 250 continues on this way and goes out to meet Interstate 64. So this is a railroad trestle over the Meacham's River. And let me see if I can enlarge this. No, oh wait. Of course, I've got to get it over. I actually talked with Scott about this yesterday, day before, and I've also talked with Rex Linville and a number of other people. So this intersection, come on, sorry. This intersection is scheduled for next year for VDOT to put a roundabout at this intersection. It's a very strange intersection, and then you've got cars going really fast coming up this way on 250, headed towards Charlottesville, and coming this way from Charlottesville. And there's a really weird little jig here that would take you to Beaver Creek Reservoir. And there is a restaurant that just went in here that is actually at the edge of the floodplain. It's a long story. I found out from Scott, it has a lot of history associated with it. But cars are zooming here, and when cars are coming through here, you don't know if they're going to be going this way or this way. So anyway, they're going to put a roundabout there. And I went to investigate the area, thinking about thinking about wildlife corridors, and also thinking about deer, bear, other wildlife collisions, because this is the second biggest intersection in the Crozet area. In the Northwest Albemarle area. The other one would be Highway 250 and Interstate 64. And it turns out the Meacham's River here is pretty wide. And I went down and looked and found out that there is excellent passage for wildlife here. However, which tab? Quick. I think it should be here. How do I get rid of this? Come on. It's not going to let me go to it. Darn it.
Can you just minimize the window?
Oh, would that help? There we go. Thank you. Thanks, Kim. Okay, so I looked at the bear deer collision data for this intersection. So here's Highway 240. I'm sorry, here's Highway 250 coming up from Interstate 64. Here's 250 going to Charlottesville. This heads in the back way to Crozet. There were like 26 deer collisions, and they were all deer collisions in this area. And so I talked to Bridget Donaldson about, would we consider doing fencing or something to keep the deer off the road along in here? And this is where the roundabout will go. And she said it's totally not feasible to put any deer fencing out because there's way too many little roads and driveways and intersections all along this area, and the deer will just, if you fence off a quarter mile till you get to the first driveway, the deer will just exit on the people's driveway and they'll still just get hit. So it wasn't feasible for deer. So I went in to look at the terrain, and there were no deer tracks, but here. There was a lot of fox and raccoon track in here. And this was really beautiful bottomland property. Talked to any of the landowners about putting this under conservation easement, or if he knew the people, the owners of some of this land. And he said he'd tried a few years ago he talked to the main landowners to see about getting it under easement, but they weren't ready at that time. And he was glad that I kind of made him rethink about it. And he said he would recontact them because it had been a few years since he'd talked to them. The main parcel owner is this piece right here. And he'd said that this is really important, valuable habitat for wildlife. And I was surprised. Oh, this is right. I was going to show y'all some pictures. Sorry, I'm not used to trying to do 15 different things on my laptop when I've got a little screen. So this is, see, it's wide, it's deep, it's great for aquatic passage. So it's not like it has issues that we figured out that we're running into with potential road crossings along Highway 29 south of Charlottesville. So there's also undeveloped land all around here, except for that one building that I mentioned is a restaurant that's under this weird, and this is on the north, that was looking north on the river. This is looking south. You can see how there's all this land underneath a very high, very wide bridge span. So there's clear passage for wildlife through here. I think the river's through this side, this section, and then there's another section on the other side that is also very clear and open for wildlife passage. This is on the south side. Again, it's pretty open for wildlife. And I think one more. There's even a little wetland area down in here. And then just on the south end of this property, it's actually pasture. So the pasture and this is all owned by the same people. And I was surprised that they weren't interested in a conservation easement because this is not being used for anything and it can't really be developed. It's in the 100-year floodplain. It's very close to the river. And Scott was laughing at me saying, Leah, you're thinking about this as a conservationist. He's like, you know, people have all kinds of reasons for not wanting to do a conservation easement. And I'm thinking, yeah, but they'd get a tax break. So I'm not sure about that, but so I wanted to share that with you all and see if anybody had any thoughts on, is there something simple that could be done or that theoretically maybe should be done to improve this as a habitat crossing, perhaps for smaller wildlife, because it doesn't seem like there's anything that can be done for deer based on conversations I've had, not only with Bridget. And then when I talked with Scott, we looked at this parcel here, which is a very strange scenario. This is flat, and this is flat on the sides of the river. So theoretically it's buildable, but these are in the 100-year floodplain and they cannot be built on. And this is owned by a person who lives very close by, and he's got it under a business name, and the business is indicated as residential real estate, basically, a residential, like building houses and renting them out. And he actually owns this property over here and rents it, you know, this one, and rents it out. So
yes.
Go ahead.
Don't be
you
so.
know these people?
No, I was just gonna say, don't be so sure they can't build there, even though it's in the 100-year floodplain. The way my understanding, it's too bad Scott left. If the county created a subdivision, like they allowed them to subdivide that piece of land off, then subdivision always comes with the right of building at least one house, no matter how absurd it is for a house to go there. And they may be required to put it on stilts or something, but they're not. It's like a by right ability to put a house there.
Okay, thank you. Because Scott was adamant that it couldn't be built on, and I'm thinking, I'm sorry, I don't trust changing zoning requirements and special use permits and, you know, down the road over time. And if this person bought this, and Scott was dumbfounded that they paid $200,000 for this 1.5 acre lot in 2016, and yet the valuation on the property, and it does not have land use or anything, or use value, whatever that's called, the valuation is like $3,500, and they spent $200,000 on a 1.5 acre lot in 2016. So it kind of doesn't make sense. So anyway, Rex is saying all this is important to get conservation. Well, the large piece is important to get conservation easement on. These two lots, well, this one is the same people as here. He said it doesn't make sense to try to get it on this because it's too small of a property to put under easement. So I'm just kind of scratching my head going, this is really important, valuable habitat. And Licking Hole Creek, I guess I can move it over here. Licking Hole Creek and Licking Hole Basin, there is a Crozet Greenway, which is one of the few protected areas in Crozet. There's this greenway trail that follows Licking Creek from way over here through behind neighborhoods and over here where there's a bald eagle's nest. And this creek comes in here and up here, and it comes in up over here. So you've got Licking Hole Creek coming through here. And so theoretically, this should be a wildlife corridor for small mammals. Because the deer don't use this and they don't use this. I guess they just go through everybody's property and eat their gardens or whatever, because all this is developed. I mean, way even more over this way. So anyway,
Bruce has his hand up.
Yeah.
Bruce, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you. I just had a question. This area, aren't that field on the north side of 250 before you get, as you're going west, before you get to 240, that field, I've seen that field flooded, and I'm just wondering if there aren't already some large culverts passing underneath 250 that couldn't be used as encouragement for wildlife to pass under the road, at least the small wildlife you've been talking about.
Are you talking about you said crossing 250, crossing over here?
Okay, when you say over here, I cannot see what you're referring to.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry,
just,
you're on the phone. I'm sorry. Yeah.
so 250 heads east-west, and it gets to that 240 where the trestle is nearby. And that field, before you get, as you're traveling west, there's a field all along 250. I don't know where it stops, but that field has certainly been flooded more than once. So water is either seeping through the road structure, or there are culverts under the road. And I'm just wondering if you know anything about that, and if there are culverts, if they couldn't be perhaps as part of the roundabout construction, used for the smaller animals, like you mentioned, the raccoons.
Okay.
If that isn't a possibility.
Thank you for that. I think guys that can see the screen, I think he's talking about this field here, because I have noticed it stays pretty wet, and this is in the 100-year floodplain, as is this one here. And there are this app, wrong app. It died while we were on the meeting, so I did a screenshot of it. These are culverts here and here. So there's a culvert on this side where Licking Hole Creek comes in on the west of that intersection, Bruce. There is no culvert on the VDOT map on the field that you're talking about on Highway 250 headed west from Charlottesville before you get to 240. And there is a tiny bridge there's a tiny bridge just not even a 1/10 of a mile north of that intersection that's right here, that's in bad shape, and which is what had me first looking at this intersection. But I looked at it, and it's just it's not feasible to mess with. Sorry, it just it gets layers and layers of complication. So when I was talking with Scott Clark about this parcel, oh, by the way, people who I think are renting from the people that own this parcel, renting a house up here, they came down and talked to me. They saw my car sitting here, and they told me that they come down to chase people away from this parcel because kayakers will bring their kayaks here as a way to access the river. And so I mentioned that to Scott, and he said, oh, well, maybe there's some opportunities to get some funding, put some hedges in here that would provide cover for wildlife, because this is all torn up from big tractor tires, like big trucks have gone in there or something. he said, put some hedges or something in here. The owners would probably be happy because that would keep people from using this for their kayaks, and it would benefit wildlife. That's as far as I've gotten. So anyway, I'll stop talking.
Well, so Leah, you're looking for, you presented this scenario, and then just, we can be thinking about what you've shared with us about opportunities. That's what you're looking for, is like putting our heads together and thinking about ways that
Right. Is there ways to enhance this for maybe small mammal passage, and particularly considering there's a roundabout here, because there's going to be construction along these edges. And now's the time to consider things, because the landowners are going to know that the roundabout's going on. They're going to be notified. There'll be communications, etc. So yeah, so maybe the thing to do, because we're about out of time, is if anybody wants to email me any thoughts, then we can communicate more.
Yeah. We'll do that. I think another thing that someone should look at too is the zoning categories around there. If that's, I suspect that that's rural area, but I don't know, since it's so close to Crozet and the growth area. But it would be interesting to know what the zoning is there, and maybe it's one of these areas that would be useful, as we talked earlier about making sure that's designated in the comp plan as green space, so the development does occur around there, that that area would be potentially proffered as green space.
Okay.
It'd be nice to see what the comp plan says about that area.
Okay.
Looks like we only have a few minutes. What 1 minute left? In the 1 minute, if I may, I just want to mention that we have our special sites list, but in the biodiversity work group report, there's also a rare species list. One of those rare species is golden club. And there was a commenter on the Virginia Native Plant Society group recently who said, "What is this plant on my property in Albemarle County?" and posted a picture of golden club. So I said, "Hey, you're in Albemarle County. That's one of our rare plants." And so I reached out to her, and unfortunately, she's only on 7 acres, so she doesn't qualify for a conservation easement. But she is someone who's interested in native plants and interested in conservation. So we'll be setting up a trip to visit her property at some point in the spring. And it's great because now we have another occurrence. There's occurrence of this plant in Sugar Hollow as well. So now we have several records of this county rare plant. It's not a state rare plant, but
that Facebook group it seems it's always so sad. Everyone's always posting invasive species and wanting to know if they're it's almost depressing.
I'm a troublemaker, so they're not going to make me a moderator of that group, but I wish they would. But yeah.
Question over and over again about that celandine that's coming up everywhere. That Ferrari. Oh God. Anyway.
But it is. I don't know what's left on the agenda, but in terms of special sites, it's a great time to get out there and visit sites. And so we're going to try and get out and see some places this spring and report back.
That sounds great. And I'm sorry that we've run out of time, and because there's more that we can talk about. But Leah, maybe you could send some of those maps out, or some of those shots that you have to the group, so we can study a little bit more, although that we can look at the recording as well. But
I'm happy to send out some things. And Scott also has access. He said he'd get me a copy of looking at that area from an oblique angle, and it really gives you a better idea of what the property looks like.
Yeah. All right. Fantastic. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Carolyn, for staying over here and being with us. Thank you for our attendees, and you guys enjoy. Have a great April, and hopefully we'll be in touch in little bits and pieces between now and then. All right.
Just on that note, it was snowing this afternoon,
Yes.
just so you know. I
Yeah.
was late to this because I was on the field and it was snowing and it's April 1st. So just so
April
you know.
Fools.
It's not.
No,
though. My husband
It was
texted
snowing
me.
here too.
I looked out the window and there it was.
Oh my gosh. All right.
7 tomorrow night, so.
Yeah, and
Did
my
we have
husband
you to
told me
make-
too, and I thought it was April Fool's. Bye.
Good
Bye,
night.
everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.